My friends, in this video there will be mixed news for the Ukrainian side, because not all of the news is good that I report here, and I want you to understand that I decided knowingly to report these news for not to be very one-sided. But we'll start with the good news, of course. I mean, we got it. United States Army Acquisition Chief Doug Bush has reported that the first batch of 31 Abrams tanks will be delivered to Ukraine in the early fall. That means September, probably. 31 Abrams tanks are worth about 500 million USD, and that price, of course, includes the training of the Ukrainian tank crews. And I feel like I already have to start with the mixed news. Now, a disclaimer. Abrams Tank is an incredibly capable tank. It's one of the best tanks in the world. If not the best, I really like it. But it's not a Wunderwaffe. So is not Challenger, and so is not the Leopard tank. And I remember where Leopard tanks were promised to Ukraine and delivered, people hyped them up a lot. Oh, now the Russians are screwed. When the Ukraine counteroffensive started in June, we saw first Leopard tanks being destroyed. And the truth is, if a Russian 152mm artillery shell scores a direct hit on an Abrams tank, I think it will be knocked out cold, right there and then. Maybe the crew will survive. The Abrams tank is designed very well for the survivability of the crew. A wonderful tank. But 155mm is 155mm. I don't know a tank in the world right now that could survive a direct hit from that shell. It's just a big shell. Nothing to do about it. So if these Abrams tanks will arrive in Ukraine, unfortunately the reality is that we will start seeing the losses of these Abrams tanks. Also, another disclaimer is that 31 tanks is such a small number, such an insignificant number, that it will unfortunately not change the outcome of the war in any way. Of course, the political message is wonderful. US supports Ukraine, the Abrams tanks are present, and I love it. I love the tank, I love that they will be there, but knowing the facts of war and the situation on the ground, 31 tanks cannot change the outcome of the war in any significant way. I'm sorry to report this, but I feel I have to bring down the expectations, because the last time the drop was quite steep when we saw the Leopards burning. And now, my friends, we'll jump to the military map, and the mixed news don't end with the Abrams tanks. I mean, the good news is that Ukraine will get the Abrams tanks, but the bad news is that they're not Wunderwaffe. I mean, I wish they were. But mixed news here is that Ukraine was very heavily pushing towards Robotyne, this settlement right here. And here we can see Robotyne, and you can see the first line of Russian fortifications, and Ukraine was pushing very close to these fortifications, almost striking the first line, and this panicked the Russian Ministry of Defense and the Russian army command structure. So they sent an incredible amount of reserves into the Robotyne area. They started pushing back very heavily to push Ukrainians away from the first line of fortifications, because then stuff would get real if Ukraine actually would break through this line. So they actually reoccupied some fields, as you can see right over here. It's a small area, but I cannot ignore it because the reserves are significant sent here. Also, Russians circulated this video. In this video we can see a burning M2A2 infantry fighting vehicle Bradley. This video could be older since it comes from the Russian sources, or it could be recent. I don't know, I cannot validate it, but it comes from the Robotyne area, which means Ukraine is using Western tech in this area, and there are losses. Bradley is an incredible infantry fighting vehicle. It is designed around the survivability of the crew, which I'm sure it did with this vehicle also. The vehicle is destroyed and burning, but I hope the crew is fine. If the vehicle hits an anti-tank mine, it will be immobile or destroyed, but the crew will be fine to climb out from the back. This is the goal of this vehicle. This is why I think it's wonderfully designed, but not invincible. No vehicle is. And now some good news for the Ukrainian side. Near Robotyne, the Ukrainian 47th Mechanized Brigade shot down a Russian newest, baddest, most expensive Ka-52 attack helicopter Alligator. Ukraine shot it down with man-pads, and man-pads are not known for their big range, so this attack helicopter probably ventured too close to the front lines to shoot out their missiles. Usually they don't go closer than 10 kilometers because Ukrainian man-pads are very active, seeking for these targets. This one probably was testing the limits, flew a little bit closer to get more accuracy on the missiles, and immediately got punished for it. Now, this is not only a Ukrainian information, also Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed this loss. The Russian attack helicopter Alligator is a very capable helicopter. It's a very good helicopter. Unfortunately, I have to say this. I cannot not give credit to it. But it will be destroyed with man-pads like any other helicopter, because it is not a Wunderwaffe. I feel like this is the main message of this video. We haven't seen any Wunderwaffes in Ukraine. It is a big loss for Russia. It's very difficult to produce these helicopters because they do require a lot of Western parts. And these helicopters produced right now have a lot of Western parts in them, without which they wouldn't operate. That's why also they're good, because they have Western capabilities in them. Now, my friends, let's zoom into Bahamut and actually the southern area of Bahamut. As we can see, the Klishivka settlement and the surrounding areas are still in the gray zone, meaning Ukrainians have not pushed into the settlement for liberating it. There is a very good reason for it. After Russians had to pull out of Klishivka due to incredibly high losses, they sent a lot of reserves into the Bahamut area and the southern Bahamut area to fortify the Klishivka axis. And the reason why Ukrainians haven't pushed forward at all on the front lines here is because the Ukrainian liberated side of Klishivka and the surrounding areas are on a heightened ground. They're not mountains, but they're heightened areas. Klishivka and the Russian occupied area of Klishivka is in a valley. It's like a kill box. And right now Russians are deploying massive amount of reserves into this kill box. Russians are exactly where the Ukrainians want them, and Ukrainians have chosen a tactic of destruction from afar. No risk for their forces because they're not pushing, and maximizing Russian losses because they're in the Ukrainian kill box. A very good strategy, but it takes time, it takes patience. And for the Western viewer, of course, it gets very repetitive hearing about no new gains for Ukraine. But that's the reality of war in this area. Of course, it's a very good tactic because Ukraine needs to preserve their capabilities. And now, my friends, we will zoom into the eastern part of Bahamut, the Russian occupied part of Bahamut. And here we can see the definition of a high value target. This is a Russian reconnaissance tower, reconnaissance point. It has cameras, it has sensors, night vision, thermal cameras, sensors that detect movement from afar away. These points are a very high value target because they see Ukrainians from very far away and they relay information to the Russian choppers, to the Russian command structure. Also, they can have jammers on them which jam Ukrainian communications. So taking out these points is of utmost importance. And in this video we can see just that happening. A Ukrainian first-person view drone with an incredibly precise hit scores a direct impact with the Russian reconnaissance tower. These hits are very hard to score because the drones are very hard to control, and it's such a small target, so it's very impressive. Also, we only see successful first-person view drone hits. We don't see the 20 that miss, because a lot of them do miss. And now, my friends, the last note from the front lines. We zoom into Velika Novosilka axis and the Russian occupied settlement of Urozhaine. Russian Vostok battalion has reported that Ukrainians have actually entered the settlement of Urozhaine. They have gained a foothold. And looking at Urozhaine and the flanking areas of it, I would say Russians would have to pull back in the near future because they would face the threat of surrounding otherwise. The fighting right now is happening in the urbanized areas of Urozhaine, which means bloody battles are happening. And now, my friends, also one of those mixed news, or actually bad news, which I hate to report, but I feel like I have to. We got a video recently near Makarivka. Here is the Mokryali river, right? And there's a Ukrainian T-72 that needed to get on the other side of the river. Now, if I zoom out, we can see that the tank could have taken a route, a longer route, and crossed the river where it's just a small stream right here, but they decided to go through the water part. Because you actually can pull off this maneuver with the T-72. If the river is shallow enough, you can for a moment go underwater and emerge from another side and nothing happens to the tank. But unfortunately, the Ukrainian tank crew made a mistake of thinking this river is shallow. It was not, it was deep. And on this footage we can see a Ukrainian T-72 just go into the river, pulling off this maneuver, and the tank stayed in the bottom of the river. It sunk. The Russians made a lot of fun over this video. But I hope the Ukrainian tank crew learned from this and no other tanks will attempt to cross this Mokryali river because it's too deep. And I will say again, I hate reporting this stuff, but I feel like I have to because these mistakes happen on both sides. I cannot ignore it. And now, my friends, the Russian losses of the past 24 hours, 8th of August 2023. 560 liquidated personnel, 10 tanks, which is weird because usually they lose 3 to 4 tanks because they don't use tanks offensively, not much anymore. But as I mentioned, the localized counter-offensive near Robotyno, the desperate push to keep Ukrainians away from the first defensive line of the Russian army, they used tanks there, and this is where we get these additional tank losses. 8 armored personnel vehicles, 19 artillery systems, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 4 UAVs, 9 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 2 special equipment. Overall, I would say the equipment losses are below 7-day average, and the liquidated personnel is about the 7-day average. The Washington Post published an article recently where they had an interview with the Alpha Group, the Ukrainian special forces of Alpha Group, who are fighting near Donbass and in southern Ukraine. And they said that they can no longer sneak into enemy territory over the front line to conduct operations behind enemy lines because the frontal areas are so heavily mined. They were able to do this last year very effectively, but not this year anymore. I mean, Russians' mining efforts are out of this world. They're mining everything to oblivion, so even the special forces cannot sneak in anymore. Talking about Alpha Group, I have met these guys in Ukraine, I have heard their stories and their experiences, and I will meet them again in Ukraine. They're incredible guys and they do God's work incredibly effective, and the stories, some of which I cannot share unfortunately, they blew my mind. And if they say they cannot cross into the Russian occupied territory anymore due to heavy mining, well, this scares me a little bit. In this video, my friends, we can see Belarusian D30. It's a D30 Soviet-made howitzer. Well, it wants to be free. It wants to also take part in fighting against Russian forces in Ukraine, and it wants to be free. So it decides to go on its own, as you can see. Be free, D30. Don't look back. Go! Don't think about the ones who are left behind. Just go and be free. Of course, the D30 was later detained and imprisoned due to the aspirations of freedom he had. The Ukrainian attack on the Russian tanker Sig is old news, of course, but new information about it comes out every day. So I will give you some information that you have not heard yet. Russian propaganda machine immediately got to work trying to accuse Ukrainians of a natural disaster because attacking a tanker, all of the oil leaks, but turned out the tanker was empty. There was nothing on it. So this is fake. There can be no natural disaster if there's nothing to leak from the tanker. Also, in the last video I made a mistake of claiming they carried oil. This tanker was actually made for aviation fuel for the Assad regime, not oil. But it was empty. Also, new information about the massive missile attack against Ukraine a few days ago. The main targets were Ukrainian Air Force bases, 2 of them actually, military airfields in Stara Konstantinovka and the Khmelnytsky region. But according to the media representative of the Ukrainian Air Force, Yuri Ignat, no Ukrainian planes were damaged in this attack because they have a protocol. As soon as any MiG-31s or Russian planes capable of carrying cruise missiles are lifting up in Belarus or Russia, all of the Ukrainian planes will be relocated. Because if they would be relocated only after the missiles have been fired out, it would be too late. The Ukrainian planes were immediately relocated to the reserve airfield, so they were not damaged. As long as Ukrainians will follow this protocol, their planes will be fine. It is a change of rhythm for the Russians because usually Russians use their cruise missiles and their, more effective weapons against civilian targets. They are terror weapons, but this time they use them for fully against military targets. So this is a change in the Russian doctrine of using their cruise missiles. This change happened because Ukrainian Air Force is a huge hindrance for the Russian frontline units. I mean, Ukrainian planes are bombarding Russian units. So Russia is once again, like in the first days of war, trying to eliminate Ukrainian Air Force by bombarding the airfields. But again, it doesn't work if Ukraine moves their planes in timely manner. And we have yet again new information about the bridges attacks of Chonhar Bridge and the Henichisk Bridge. I know for the fact that this hole was actually made by a Storm Shadow missile, and some of you said, oh, it's too small of a hole, it had to be GLMRS or something else. Well, no, it was Storm Shadow. But a lot of you commented very correctly actually that Storm Shadow has 450 kilograms of explosives, which should make a lot bigger hole than this. Well, the truth is Storm Shadow is designed to penetrate into bunkers, so it's designed to penetrate the first layer of obstacles, and this road was nothing to the Storm Shadow. This hole is only made by the physical missile going through the road. The real explosion happened underneath the bridge, unfortunately, so most of the force was dissipated into the waves or whatever was beneath the bridge. As we can see, there's water beneath, so if the explosion would have happened on the road, on the pavement, and the entire 450 kilograms of explosives would have been exploded to the pavement, I mean, there would be nothing left of this bridge. Some of you commented that Storm Shadow can be programmed to be exploded 1 meter or 2 meters above the ground. I think this setting would be correct if you try to attack the bridge, but since Ukrainians know how to use Storm Shadow, the goal was, I think, to truly penetrate to the first layer of asphalt to strike the pillars beneath the bridge, to take out the supporting structure of the bridge with the 450 kilograms of explosives. This would explain why Ukrainians didn't put on the settings that it would explode on the pavement, but unfortunately hit the water beneath the bridge. So now on this footage we can see the Jonhar bridge being used by Russian vehicles. Light vehicles can pass the bridge, avoiding the holes. No heavy vehicles are allowed, but civilian traffic is already working. So Ukraine can attack this bridge again, of course, but some different strategies need to be used. Also, how are Ukrainians using the Storm Shadow missiles on the Russian occupied territory? They have a very specific strategy for it. They don't send the Storm Shadow first, they send it last. There's 3 waves of what Ukraine sent. The first one is a decoy missile, ADM-160 Mold. This is designed to lure out the Russian air defense capabilities. After that, Ukraine launches a radar-seeking missile, Harm. You all know about that. I remember reporting when it was sent to Ukraine, and it's very effective. And that will seek out the active Russian air defense and destroy it, and only after that the Storm Shadow arrives. Because Storm Shadow is such an expensive missile and such an effective missile, it will never be sent alone. To get everything out of this Storm Shadow missile attack, meaning that they will attack the target, but they will also attack the surrounding Russian air defense, they will send all of these 3 capabilities out at the same time or with a few minutes apart. It's a very good tactic. But if we're talking about this bridge, then yes, it needs another hit. My friends, on this photo you can see 6 Russian ports of the Black Sea that Ukraine officially stated that are in a war zone. These are one of the main ports that Russia exports everything through the Black Sea. They're using these ports and they're in Russian territory. But since they're so close to the war zone, Ukraine officially put out the information to everybody, including Russia and the insurance companies who insure the Russian ships. Russia needs insurance companies to sail through the Black Sea or through the Turkish Strait. You cannot sail through it if you don't have insurance. Meaning that the insurance for Russian ships will skyrocket. It will get incredibly high because they have to operate in a war zone because Ukraine has said so. And Ukraine has showed that they have the capability with their sea drones to actually threaten these ports. So about 20%, 30% of entire Russian oil exports happen through the Black Sea. And if the insurance is skyrocketing, that is a huge hit for the Russian military budget because it gets the money directly from oil exports. So Ukraine needs Russia back in the grain deal, and Russia needs Ukraine to back off with their sea drones. So Russia pulled out of the grain deal thinking they have all of the cards. And then Ukraine started heavily using their sea drones, showing that they have cards also. Both of them have capabilities to stop maritime shipping for another country. And now Russia is seriously thinking about getting back into the grain deal, because if they're not in the grain deal, basically they cannot export oil through the Black Sea because Ukraine has capability to stop it. My friends, the most juiciest part of the video, the part where I butcher some Patreon names, and we haven't gotten a patron this big for a long time. Roger Kaksisve Wak. Thank you for being such a big Patreon, man. You're helping me out a lot. Pal B. Frank Domestico. Richard Konkepkion. Thank you, Mr. Konkepkion. Paul Pricehav. Thank you to these 5 people for supporting the channel. If you want me to butcher your name, sign up for Patreon for tier 10 and above and put on your earplugs to avoid ear bleeding. Also, my friends, check out my Twitter account, because there 3 times a day you get the most important news about Russo-Ukrainian war in the most compact form possible. Also check out my Instagram, because I'm going back in September to Ukraine, and as I mentioned, I'll be talking to some of the special forces guys because we're delivering trucks for special forces. I'll put it all into the Instagram, so I'll see you there. And as always, my friends, until the next video, which is tomorrow, Slava Ukraini.